Hi all, let's have a look at another amazing mega clash between Leela and Stockfish. This is in the Chess.com Rapid Redux Stage 3. This is a 30 minutes with a 5-second increment time control. The opening book given, D4 from Leela. It's actually the King's Engine defense, and here is where the book ended. We have Knight C3. Now black could play Grunfeld style with D5, but actually Stockfish castles, and we have the King's Engine defense. So E5 here played, and now Knight A6. This is actually quite popular in recent years as an alternative to the main Knight C6. So very interesting. Bishop E3, Knight G4, Bishop G5, F6. The bishop drops back. This has been seen before quite a lot in over-the-board chess. King H8 was played by Stockfish. This is a little bit of a novelty. Usually C6 is played here. For example, H3, the knight goes back, and the knight goes back to F7, away from the harm of Queen D2, potentially, and supporting E5. So this is a bit of a novelty move, King H8. H3, Knight H6. We have Rook B1. So preparing queenside play, C6. Queen E8 has been seen before in a high-level over-the-board game. Chris Beaumont against Richard Bates. That ended in a draw. That was played in Newport 1998 and saw this kind of play. White did have a space advantage and structural advantage, but black had some D-file pressure, and it was eventually a draw. Let's actually go to where they drew. So it was a draw here. So instead of Queen E8 though, C6 was played by Stockfish. We have B4, Knight C7, B5, Knight F7. You might wonder, what about taking? White gets a positional advantage after taking on E5, taking on B5. This looks like black's under pressure, and it's pretty uncomfortable. White does have a positional advantage, and if there's a problem with F6, yeah, this makes it a clear advantage in this illustration. For example, F5 can be picked on, so big advantage. So that's pretty dangerous to take, actually, it seems. Knight F7 is played. B takes, D5. So white does have this space advantage. Queen B3, Rook B8, Queen C2, a pair of rooks come off. C5. So pretty close position. White has a space advantage. How can this be converted to anything though? Bishop D2, Queen A8, Queen C2, Rook B8. Now Knight H2 with ideas of Bishop G4 to try and trade off this light square defender bishop. We have Rook B7, Bishop G4. You might think, couldn't black have kind of discouraged Bishop G4 with H5? That really just weakens G6, so white can play like this, for example, for G6 with an advantage. So we have Rook B7, allowing Bishop G4, the bishop goes to E8. H4, and now H5 is played anyway. This does weaken black's structure a bit. Bishop keeps on that diagonal, so black is being restricted here. Positioning, Queen D8, Knight E2, Queen E7, Rook B1, Knight A8. On taking on B1, again, it's a really nagging positional advantage. The advantage is more storable because of the closed structure in this position. It's less about tactics. It's more about accumulating small positional advantages. So in this variation, for example, white can be better. White's got a space advantage and plenty of maneuvering possibilities. So black played Knight A8, Bishop A5, Knight B6, Queen D3, Bishop H6, Knight F1, King G7, Knight C3, Queen C7, Rook B3. So building up some pressure here with the potential of doubling on that knight. Bishop F4, Bishop E6, Knight D8. The Queen actually goes to F3 here though, and not minding knight takes E6. We have Queen E7. On knight takes E6, the D5 square is very, very useful. as you might imagine, soon. Knight d5's come. White's got a big advantage there. So queen e7, bishop c8, quite a nifty tactic in its own right. The rook goes to b8. On taking, then there's bishop takes d8. Let's put that on the board. And the queen can't really protect the rook, so white ends up better there. So we have queen e7. Sorry, bishop c8, rook b8. The bishop drops back. Rook b7, queen d1, knight f7. On knight takes c4, same tactic as before. Bishop takes d8, overloads the queen. So knight f7, queen b1, queen c7, knight b5, queen e7. So positional manoeuvring until here. Bishop takes b6. A takes is played. On rook takes, just to illustrate rook takes, it seems white can play a4, for example, a5, get a form pawn on the queen side, and work on the king side after. So, for example, to try and weaken that f5 square as an illustration, eventually playing for a knight, or to weaken f5, and white ends up much better actually. Yeah, this is just too passive for black over here. Black has to keep a certain level of activity. So a takes, knight c3, queen c7, rook a3, queen e8, g3, bishop goes back, the rook goes into a6, g5, that does compromise f5, knight e3, g4, check, the bishop drops back. Yeah, white is getting a big positional advantage on both sides of the board against the mighty Stockfish, it seems. Queen b2, bishop f8, bishop d3, and actually Stockfish doesn't tolerate this knight anymore. It actually takes on f5. Yeah, this is, if you look at this position, black is very passive. There are various plans available for white, including, for example, a4, with the possibility of a5 sometimes. So this looks a little bit of a concession, and in fact trying to get some activity with e4 now. An immediate pawn sack is the idea. And if black, say, plays bishop g7, you can see white improving the position. Key move bishop e4 to destroy any counterplay, and this kind of way of improving the position would eventually win that b6 pawn. Yeah, the knight's going into that c6 square potentially. So it is actually representing a desperate position before this bishop takes f5 and e4. Yeah, this idea of knight b5, knight a7 is very dangerous. So we have this pawn sack for a bit of activity. The bishop drops back, protecting f3. Bishop e7, knight c3, king g7, queen b1, king h8, king g2, king g7, queen b5, queen c8, which hits f5. The queen comes back actually on this occasion to defend f5. If the queen has gone to c7, by the way, queen e8 is interesting, and hitting h5. Now it's a bit actually dangerous to take on h5, but just taking the queens off here secures white's advantage because of this f3 move. So outside pass pawn, extra pawn, and g4 drops, creating a 3-to-1 pawn majority. So we have queen c8, queen b1, protecting f5, king h7, and yeah, black lets that b6 go here for f5. That's a trade that's made. So basically, exchange of prisoners, as Dimitrovic might say, exchanging b6 for f5. But now there's queen b7, knight g6 protects the bishop. Queen b1 tries to get the queens off. Black really can't refuse. And note, white has a very dangerous passed outside pawn here. Black played queen takes b1. On queen d7, there's an example. The pin can be exploited, celebrated with bishop d3. And for example, knight b5. And if things are dropping off, this is looking very unpleasant. So yeah, it's pretty unpleasant. The knight might be coming to c7 to e6 as well. So the queen's just taken off. So this endgame, it's opposite colored bishops. You might think, isn't this just a complete draw, even though there's an outside pawn? Let's see. Knight e5, knight a3. The king comes to g6, knight b5, putting pressure on d6. Now the knight actually goes to c6 for a7. So it's able to herd the pawn by itself. Check. Actually, it takes time out for this now, f3, to undermine black's pawn structure over here, controlling f5. We have knight f4, and knight e5, f4, knight g6, and now knight c8, and the knight goes back to a7, and the king starts coming over here, knight c6. So interesting move. There's the possibility of bishop f5 check if knight takes c6. So black didn't take on c6. We have this, bishop e4, bishop c7, king e2. This king comes up. Now f5 is committed to. The king goes on the queen side now, just in time with king b3, because black could try and win this pawn with d5 and king d6. We have d5 and now king a4 with the idea of king b5. King d6 is played. On d takes, bishop takes, this position is good for the outside passed pawn and winning c5. That's winning for white. So king d6, king b5, c takes, a4. This outside passed pawn is actually really dangerous here. Yeah, it's actually white's now winning a bishop, and the rest of the game is pretty much technique after this. So yeah, this just looks as though black's at breaking point, because the outside passed pawn, king b6 to b7 and a4, and the a pawn marches. So beyond this point, it's just hopelessly lost. This is at move 87. It is just hopelessly lost now with the outside passed pawn. Let's just see the technique. If there's trolling, yeah, there is a bit of trolling. Under promoting a knight. Very naughty Leela at work again. And giving up the knight, and then spending a few more moves with the queen to checkmate. I'm not really sure what's happened in this queen versus king endgame scenario. It seems Leela is playing with the food a bit here, until eventually wakes up to moving the king, restricting the king with the queen, and then checkmating. Okay, an interesting positional game. The king's engine defense can sometimes be a bit cramped. White's b4 plan did seem to have the effect of putting some queenside pressure, which resulted in an outside passed pawn asset. As the pieces get exchanged, that asset, the outside passed pawn, is made more important, as this game shows. So maybe some instructive positional points to bear in mind in these types of positions. If you enjoyed this game video, then please click on the top left box, become a member at chessbowl.net, play against other YouTubers. You can also check the YouTube analysis in advance of these games from the improved menu, learn from the Masters YouTube order button. Comments, questions, donations, see the description. Like, share, subscribe with that notification bell. Really appreciated. Thanks very much.